Right, let's get started because I've got 20 minutes and we're going to do some live analysis in those 20 minutes. So hold on to your hats. This is going to be fast moving at times. Okay, I'm talking about analysing the responses to open-ended questions asked in a survey situation. This is a relatively new form of data. There's no real methodological history for how to analyse this data because until a few years ago it was totally impossible. Really, it's the advent of online survey tools that make this possible. Very, very occasionally in face-to-face survey interviews, they tried asking open-ended questions, but the interviewers rarely typed the full answer, so the data that was collected was very poor quality. But now you can have high-quality data, qualitative data, from a large sample size. So we have a new analytical problem. How do we analyse it? I advocate a hybrid method where computers do what computers do well, counting, searching and grouping, and people do what people do well and computers do badly, deciding what is important, what is useful, what is interesting, so the two working together. But depending on your analytical requirement, within that, there's a spectrum where you may move more towards a manual approach or an automated approach, depending on where you're trying to get to. The way you've collected your data may also have an impact on the way you analyse it. So is it recorded? Is it self-typed? Was it interviewers mediating and so on? So that can have an impact. You need to consider those things. And also how you've designed your questionnaire. Did you group all your open-ended questions together, making a kind of conversational interview? If you've done that, you'll need to analyse them all together. But if you've separated open questions between closed questions, then you're more likely to want to analyse the questions separately. A little interesting thing I always like to include in these talks: who does the work in a survey situation? The quantitative people have had it all their own way for rather too long. And I argue that their data isn't necessarily better, because who does the work of analysis in a survey situation, a classic survey situation? The analyst fixes the categories in advance, shows the respondent a response card or something with the closed responses possible, and asks the respondent to code their idea, don't they? It's the respondent who does the work. They do it once. What I advocate in these open-ended questions, the analyst fixes the categories after collecting the data, and it's the analyst who does the coding over and over again. You could say he might get more accurate results. One thing qualitative people need to take on board, though, is that the quantitative people always look one variable at a time, what they call a variable, one question at a time, and they analyse it fully, whereas we're used to analysing a whole document, a whole set of questions. But for this, we may need to look one question at a time. The data I'm going to use in this demonstration is somewhat fictitious, which is why it makes it possible to use. The topic is experience of the economic crash. Already 10 years ago. My goodness, how time flies. There are 191 cases in this study. They were asked 4 open-ended questions and 9 closed questions. And the open questions were spread around, so I'm going to analyse them separately. So here is the data as it has come, in theory, out of a survey program. If you're lucky enough to have access to SurveyMonkey, you don't need to do this step, which is in Excel, because MAXQDA now has a direct import from SurveyMonkey right into MAXQDA. But if it's any other one, you'll need to do an intermediate step through Excel, which is what I'm illustrating here. There's a row for each case. All of the data is along the row. Each column heading in row 1 has an identifier of the question that they were asked. These things in row 1 will appear in MAXQDA. So you might want to edit your question labels if you've used rather abstract things in the online survey tool. You may want to turn them back into your own language because so that you understand them when you meet them in MAXQDA in a completely different context. Requirements. In column 1, it is important that you include something that will identify the document group where the data will go inside MAXQDA. So I've got the word survey repeated all the way down here. If you want to have your survey divided up into separate document groups, 100 in the first group, 200 in the next group or something, you'll need to set those group names up and do lots of copying down. Put them in column 1. You can call it anything you like. I've called it document group. You'll see that makes life a slight tiny bit easier when we import it. The second column has a unique identifier for each respondent. Often the survey tool will give you this. You don't need to do very much about it, but just check that you have got a unique identifier there. Right, that is an Excel workbook. It's got 191 rows. I'm now going to import it into MAXQDA. I've got to close it because MAXQDA cannot access it while the Excel file is open. I've already got an empty project ready for the task here. So here is a new project. I've called it Demo Import 2. No data in it at all. I'm going to use, from the Import ribbon, the Survey Data button here. There's the direct import from SurveyMonkey as an option, but I've got to do the Excel spreadsheet because I'm not using SurveyMonkey. It navigates to where I put it. That's nice and easy because I think it's in the right place, yes. So I can just open that Excel file. Now I get a slightly complicated dialog, but it's not as bad as it looks. In the top, it's just identifying the document group and document name. And because on my spreadsheet, I put A1 and I typed in document group, and B1 I typed in document name, those are coming up with the easy identifiers that help me to match the document group and the document name. But if you use something else, identify for yourself. Down here is where I have to do a little bit of work. I've got to tell MAXQDA which columns I want to be treated as texts and which columns I want to be treated as variables. MAXQDA calls the texts codes because it is going to code them. This is the data that we're going to be working with coding. And I know from my own memory that it was question 2 was a text one, question 3A, question 4A, and question 5A. So I just have to arrange the ticks. I want a tick in the code column for everything that will be an open text, which is what the subject of our analysis. Anything in the variable column will go into document variables, and we'll only come back to that right at the end of the session. An important option down here, you have the option to code empty cells. My personal recommendation to you is don't. Leave that empty. If I leave it empty, I will get non-responses will not be coded. People who haven't answered the question will not be coded, and so I'll be able to see exactly how many questions each case has answered and how many answers I've got to each of my questions. That'll become a little bit more apparent when we go to the next step. I click on the OK. I now get just the variables. I get the chance now to change the nature of the variable in MAXQDA, in the document variables. Most of these, we've got a preview of the data type. They mostly clearly fall in text, which is the default, but there is one possibly scaled variable here. How secure do you feel in your job? So I could change that from text at this point and say, no, I want to treat that as an integer variable, as a number. And MAXQDA will then create a document variable in the integer format for that data. The age is done in groups, so that will come in as a categorical variable rather than a numeric variable. I now do the import. Start the watches. Here we go. We've got 191 cases. We're already nearly halfway there. This is live. Never work with children or animals or demonstrate software live, they say. I like to break the rules. Here we now have a little summary of what MAXQDA has just done. If you're doing this in a live project, it would be a good idea. You've got a copy button here. Copy this, save it somewhere. You might want to reproduce it in your final report as evidence of what you actually imported into your analysis. 191 texts, i.e. 191 cases, 4 codes for text type documents or type answers, 9 variables, nothing missed, no ignored documents. That's the one that's important. All the data was usable. I'll close that. Now, we now have the data here. In the document system, we've got all of our cases from the second column of the spreadsheet. Because we didn't tick the code empty boxes, these numbers make sense. So I can see that respondent 03 was a good one. They answered all 4 questions. I'll just make my window a little bit larger here. And I can see the 4 questions responded there. If I scroll down a bit further, I soon find somebody who answered no questions at all. and in between, all things in between. Down here in the code system, I have a code for each of my 4 text questions. All the ones which started with a Q and a number was a little clue to myself to make that step easy. So these are the identifiers of the questions we want to analyze as open-ended texts. And in the import process, MAXQDA has applied those codes to the appropriate rows, or, sorry, didn't mean that, paragraphs in the, I meant to click on that, I clicked in the wrong part and accidentally opened a document memo. The codes have been applied to the relevant data here. This means now, if I activate all of my documents and I activate one question, I'm going to use question 3A, which has 48 responses. Down here in the retrieved segments, I have all the responses to that question. This is where we can start working one question at a time. If I now work in the retrieved segments section, I'm working with just the answers to the question, whose fault was it? Which reminds me, at this stage, before I do the analysis, I would strongly recommend an extra little step that you do here. You open up the code memo for the question. Where's it gone? Oh, it's just taking a little moment. And you type in here the exact wording of the question that you had in your survey instrument. At some stages, you'll find it very useful to be able to quickly look. So I'm just going to type in a phrase, whose fault was the economic crash, or something. It was something like, oh dear, what dreadful typing. Well, never mind. Give it a question mark. Close that. Now I know that at any stage when I'm just unsure, all I've got to do is hover over that memo symbol and I can read my question again. Much easier than having to go back to a printout of the survey instrument and leaf through the various pages and so on. Now, MAXQDA in the analysis ribbon gives you a special tool for categorizing survey data. I'm not going to use it yet because I'm going to use another MAXQDA tool before that. I'm going to use MAXDictio. You do need to have MAXQDA Plus to do this particular step, but if you're going to do a lot of surveys, it would be well worth investing in MAXQDA Plus. I'm going to use the word frequencies tool, and I'm going to ask MAXQDA to just look at the responses to one question and give me the most frequent words, and that'll give me the clues to the most common answers and get me kicked off on the coding step. So here is the MAXDictio word frequency thing. Very important for this work that I include these ticks, only activated documents and only retrieved segments. That's what will limit the word frequency search to just this question that I'm interested in. Whose fault? So make sure you've got that setting. I don't need any differentiation, but I do need to consider these options down here on the right. What's the minimum number of characters that I want in the words that MAXQDA counts? If I set this very low, such as 2, it will include words like of, as, is, and I probably don't want to have those counted. I can also use stop lists to include lots of those. If I set it too high, to 4, I won't get words like job. Sometimes in English, short words can carry big meaning. So, and it depends, you can work in any language, so we're illustrating this in English, but you can do this in your own languages and so on. I'm going to set it at 3 today, so that I do get words like job. There is a lemmatization option down here with multiple languages that you can choose. This lemmatization is using a common word stem, and all the words that share a stem, like come, coming, came, will all get grouped together as one hit in the search. And also the time, like give, gave, given. Yes, I think those kind of things. You may need to explore a bit, but it'll certainly cut down the amount of duplicates. Let's click OK, because time is limited, and move on. It's now run the search, and it gives us this display. Here are the words. They are ordered by the frequency table. I find it quite useful to quickly drag the frequency table to the left so that it's immediately beside the words, because this is the data that I'm really interested in for this task. I'm not so interested in rank and percentages over there. I'm looking down this list for words which look as though they answer the question. Whose fault was the economic crash? Look, here we are, about the 6th or 7th one down, the word bank. I think that's going to be worth following up. What I now do is I do a right mouse click on that, and up comes in the little context menu, search results. So I can run a search for the word bank in the retrieved segments. This is all working in the retrieved segments, the answers to one question. I now get the display of 21 hits for the word bank, and you'll also see we've got banks and banking, that's the lemmatization working. I can now read this fairly quickly to see, are they talking about something reasonably consistent? And I think they mostly are. But there's one here, something about we need the banks to be healthy. That doesn't sound as though that's blaming the banks. So I'm just going to look at that now. I'm running out of time, so it's there in the document browser behind. Is that answer if you want to see any more context. But I'm going to just use that as an illustration to exclude. I'm going to use the little no entry button here for that one because I don't think that one is the same as the others. So that no entry will exclude it from the next step, which is to autocode. So I'm now going to create a code for banks. I can give it a color if I want. I could give it a code memo. It was auto-coded. It's a good idea to keep a record of what your searches have been. And I'm going to put an asterisk to indicate that it was lemmatized. OK. Now I get the option, how much text do I want to code? If I want to count instances of the word bank or banking, I would just code the search string. I'm only interested actually in the paragraph. I'm only interested in, did they mention banks in their answer? So I'm going to choose to code the whole paragraph because each answer is a paragraph, the way the data was brought in from Excel. So I will only get one hit for each respondent that mentioned it. Click the autocode, it does it. It's coded 18 document segments. I started off with 21 hits and I excluded one, so I might expect to get 20 segments coded. I've only got 18 because in two places people use the word twice within their answer. By coding the paragraph, I only get one hit. If I'd coded the search string, I'd have got 2 hits in those cases. Close that. Oh, I don't have to close that, actually. Now I can look down for the next word. I'm getting on with my analysis. A little way down here, I'm afraid we find Europe. So I could search for that, get the search hits. I could create an autocode for Europe. I'm afraid this is where the roots of Brexit started to be, the seeds of Brexit were sown. Blame Europe for what our banks did. I mean, I ask you. Okay, so that's established the principle. Notice that by doing that, the code has gone up to the top of the code system, the codes that I created. So I now need to drag the codes I've just created and make them subcodes of the question that they are. That was just a little operation that you'd need to do before you move on to the next step. I'm now going to open a different project in the classic style of television children's shows. Here's one I did earlier, or here's one I made earlier. So here is the same data a few hours, maybe days later, and I've got quite a lot of coding work has been done. Here are my 4 questions still here, the same, it's exactly the same data, but now I've got many more coded segments in these because we've applied thematic codes. And if I look at the question we've been working at, oh, it's at the same point. But if I look at one of the other questions, like how have you been affected, here is the full question text. How have you been personally affected by the financial crisis was the precise question. And these are all the codes that we've created for that. Let me come back to a different question. I think it's this one. Tripped up. No, I'm going to do this one. I'm going to activate all of my survey documents and I'm going to activate this question. I'm now going to use the new MAXQDA tool, Categorize Survey Data. I've done some quick and dirty coding with MaxDictio. It's given me some key items. Now I come back and use the Categorize Survey Data, drag a code, OK, I'm going to drag in the comment purchases and click OK. Now this is a new screen, you may not all have seen this. I've got the codes that I'm working with by dragging in the Q5A comments question. I've got it and its subcodes here in the margin. These are the only codes I'm interested in because in the middle I've got all the responses to this particular question, and this one was add further comments regarding larger expenditures in the last 3 months. Following the question, have you made any purchases over £500 in the last 3 months? And you can see here on the right hand side we've got indications of the codes that have been applied. As long as I click on the top one, the question code, that code is not displayed. All the other codes from this list are the ones that are displayed here. You can see here is a response that's been coded to 3 separate themes. What I'm looking for as I scroll down is empty rows. And here is an empty row. This one, respondent 437, has typed can't really remember anything. Not a very useful answer. That's why my previous efforts at coding it haven't actually come up with anything. I could create a new code for uncategorizable or uncodable if I want to be absolutely complete, or I can look at it, consider, fair enough, I haven't coded it, I'm going to ignore it, discard it. You've got a methodological choice at that point. What I want to emphasize is that this new Categorize Survey Data tool makes it very easy to scroll down and pick out the uncoded items and further investigate them. Also, it makes it very easy to check on the consistency. So now if I click on a code like computers, these are all the responses that have been coded with computers as part of their answer. I can quickly scan them again and make sure update laptop, old laptop, new laptop. Looks as though we've been reasonably consistent on here. But I can check each of my codes very quickly for consistency. So within this Categorized Survey Data tool, I've not only got a means of creating and applying new codes, but also checking both for omissions, for uncoded data, and for consistency. I'm talking type 1, type 2 errors checking here. So brilliant. It's a fantastic tool. Thank you very much, Verbi, for that. I'm going to quit that, assume we've done any further adjustments. Now we're into reporting. Okay? You've got to write a report. You've done your analysis now. How do you feed back, answer to people what you've done? Well, in the analysis ribbon, we've got a wonderful tool here, code frequencies. This is another new one in MAXQDA 2018. It works really well. We can just paste in the activated codes to this dialog. That's a really nice little button. So now, I've got all the codes that I'm working with for this question 5A, only for activated documents. Click OK. I get a nice table. I can sort this table in a variety of ways. By default, it comes in descending order by frequency, but if I want, I could order it alphabetically, if that was for a particular purpose, up or down. I will go back to the frequency in that way because it'll work slightly better for the next step because I can turn this table into a chart. Personally, I quite like the horizontal charts for these. I think they're slightly better for reading the words that are key because they're the code names that we've got here are key for interpreting this. Now, I've got the overall question code at the top, so that's giving me all my answers. Might be a good idea to exclude that. So I'm going to go back, I'm going to come reset, and I'm going to, how do I do it? If I activate all the codes and then shift click on that, I can deactivate the question code without deactivating its subcodes. So I did control click to activate the whole group and then shift click to deactivate the question code. Let's just do it again. Actually, I could have removed it at this step, couldn't I? There's a remove codes there. Okay. Now I haven't got that one. When I go into the chart and do the horizontal chart, it looks much better because it's spreading the important data more informatively. So that could, you've got lots of buttons, by the way, for adding titles and so on, and you can choose whether you want to have percentages or numbers in your display. You've got lots of formatting options, but to create something that you could then export, store it, put it into a document, put it into your report. Now, last step, if you'll bear with me, we brought in some variables, didn't we, from the survey. So let's bring those into case. If we go to mixed methods and use the Crosstabs tool, I can bring something like age into the thing. Now it's important with crosstabs, I want to use this little button, insert all variable values as conditions when making the formula. If I tick that first, then move age group into the thing, I get all my age groups set up here. Unfortunately, they haven't come in a sensible order, but I'm short of time, so I'm not going to worry. Click OK and create the table. Now, this really impressed somebody yesterday, one of my audience, so I hope it'll work for you. I'm just going to make the columns a little bit narrower so that they display slightly better, because they haven't got very long titles. So what this is showing is for each of the codes, the frequency with which it's been responded, sorted into groups according to the ages of the respondents, the self-declared ages. And we might see some patterns, but we've got to be careful of the number of documents. Down here, there's only one document in the 70 to 79-year-old group, whereas we've got 58 documents of the 60-year-olds. So we might actually sometimes exclude the 70-year-old from this. But we can start looking for patterns in this data if we want, and we can convert it into percentages either by row and column and so on. So now we had a survey. Any of the closed questions we can use in conjunction with the open questions. So please don't just stop at the pretty bar chart with all those coloured bars and say these are the ones, the table of responses. Investigate the relationship between some of your key variables, some of the key closed questions that you included with the data, because MAXQDA makes it so easy.